They threw Mara Whitlock into the snow with nothing. 3 days later, she found a place where winter didn't exist. Black Hollow did not forgive weakness. Not in summer. And certainly not in November. By the time Mara turned 16, the ground had already begun to harden. Frost clung to the edges of every roof, wind moved through the valley, slow, steady, carrying the kind of cold that didn't leave. It settled. Waited. And then took what it could. Her father had understood that. Thomas Whitlock had built their homestead, not for comfort, for survival. Every board placed tight, every stone set with purpose, every lesson he gave her, measured against winter. Watch the weather, he used to say, it tells you what comes next. He had taught her everything. How to read the sky, how to repair tools. How to store food where it wouldn't spoil. How to survive, when nothing else helped. What he hadn't taught her, was how quickly it could all be taken. He died in early October, too fast. Too quiet. And before the ground had even finished settling over his grave, someone else came to claim what he left behind. Elias Whitlock. Her uncle. A man who had failed everywhere else, and arrived in Black Hollow looking for something easier. He brought papers, legal, official. Convincing enough, not true. But true enough for a place like that. Mara saw the flaws immediately. The mismatched ink, the altered date. The names that didn't belong to any town she knew, but none of it mattered. Because in Black Hollow, a man with paper outranked a girl with truth. Within a week, the locks were changed. Within 2, everything her father had built began to disappear. Tools sold. Animals traded, supplies wasted. Not carefully, not strategically, carelessly, as if winter were optional. As if survival was guaranteed. Mara tried to stop him, at first, quietly. Then firmly. Because she could already see it, the pattern, the same mistakes her father had warned her about. Neglecting the animals, burning through supplies too quickly, ignoring what came next. You're thinking like him, Elias snapped one evening, like you still own this place. I'm thinking about winter, Mara replied. That was the mistake, not what she said, how she said it. The same words her father used, the same tone, the same certainty. Elias went still, then angry. Then something worse. You don't tell me how to run my house, it won't be a house if you keep doing this. Silence followed, short. Sharp. Then he grabbed her arm, hard. Dragged her toward the door. You don't live here anymore. She didn't fight.
She couldn't, because she understood. This was already decided. The door opened, cold rushed in, immediate, violent. He pushed her out into the snow. No coat, no food, no supplies. Just the clothes she wore, and the key around her neck. Iron, rectangular, heavy enough to matter. You come back, he said. I'll shoot you. The door closed, and just like that, everything she had was gone. Mara stood there for a moment, not moving, not thinking. Because shock is quieter than fear. Then the cold reached her, fast, through fabric, through skin, into bone. And her body made the decision for her. Move. She turned toward the mountains, not because she had a plan, because she had a direction. Her father's journal, hidden, safe, clutched in her hand. Inside it, notes, descriptions, fragments of something he had found years ago. A place he had never shown anyone. A place he had written about, but never explained. Not fully, not clearly. Just enough. Enough to remember. Enough to follow. November is not kind in Idaho territory. Snow came early, wind cut deeper each night. The ground hardened beneath her feet. Mara walked, because stopping was not an option. The first night, she found a shallow overhang. Not shelter, just less exposure. She curled into herself, held heat as long as she could. Slept in fragments. The second night was worse. The third almost ended her. Exhaustion. Hunger. Cold that no longer felt sharp, just heavy. That was the dangerous part. When the body stops reacting, when it begins to give in. On the fourth day, she saw it. Not clearly, not at first. Just movement in the distance. Water, partially frozen, spilling over rock. A waterfall. In winter. That didn't make sense. She moved closer. Carefully, because ice like that breaks without warning. The air changed, subtly. Warmer. Not by much, but enough. Enough to notice. Behind the falling water, there was something else. A shadow. An opening. Hidden. Mara climbed. Hands numb. Feet slipping against stone. Every movement deliberate. Because one mistake would end everything. She pushed through the frozen curtain. And the world changed. The wind disappeared. The sound shifted. The cold stopped moving. Inside, there was warmth. Not fire. Not sunlight. Something else. Rising from below. Slow. Constant. Alive. Mara stepped forward. And for the first time in days, she stopped shivering.
At first, she didn't trust it. Warmth in winter was something that had to be earned, built, maintained, not found. But the air inside the cave did not behave like the air outside. It didn't bite, didn't move, didn't strip heat away the moment you stopped fighting for it. It held, steady, as if the cold had been left behind at the entrance. Mara stood just inside the opening, waiting for the illusion to break, for the cold to catch up, for the warmth to disappear. It didn't. She took another step, then another, deeper into the cave. The light changed first. Not brighter, different. A faint glow, coming from somewhere ahead. Not fire, not reflection. Something softer, stranger. The ground beneath her feet grew damp, stone turning slick with moisture, and the air, warmer, noticeably now, enough that her hands began to ache, the kind of ache that comes when feeling returns. That was when she knew. This wasn't luck. This was something else. The passage opened suddenly, from narrow stone, into space, a chamber so large. Her eyes struggled to adjust. The ceiling disappeared into darkness. Walls lined with mineral deposits, catching the faint light, reflecting it in fractured patterns. And at the center, the source. Water. Still. Dark. Breathing. Steam rose from it in slow waves, filling the space, holding the warmth. This was not surface water. Not rain. Not melt. This came from deeper, from somewhere the cold could not reach. Mara stepped closer, careful, because something this unusual had to be understood.
Not trusted. Not immediately. She knelt beside the edge, extended her hand, paused, then lowered it into the water. Warm. Not slightly. Not gradually. Consistently. Deep warmth. The kind that does not depend on weather. That was when it became clear. This place was not surviving winter. It was ignoring it, because it existed outside of it. The heat wasn't coming from above. Not from the sun. Not from air. It was coming from below. From the earth itself. Constant. Unchanging. Unaffected. That was why it held. That was why it worked. Mara sat back slowly, letting the realization settle. Because this was not just shelter. It was a system. One her father had known about. One he had never fully explained. Now she understood why. Places like this aren't shared easily. They aren't written about clearly. Because once known, they are taken, used, destroyed. Her father had protected it. And now, it was protecting her. She stayed there for a long time. Not moving. Not thinking.
Body recover. Letting warmth return to places she had already begun to lose. Eventually, she stood. Looked around again. Not as someone searching, as someone planning. Because survival is not just finding shelter. It's using it correctly. The cave was not uniform. That was the first thing she noticed. Closer to the spring, too warm, too damp. Not a place to sleep. Farther back, cooler, dry, stable, and deeper still, cold again. Not freezing, but cold enough. Zones. Different temperatures. Different uses. That was what made it viable. That was what made it sustainable. She moved carefully through the space. Mapping it. Remembering. Marking in her mind where each section shifted. Because in a place like this, knowledge is structure. And structure is survival. By nightfall, she had chosen her place. A ledge. Raised. Dry. Close enough to the warmth, but not inside it. That balance mattered. Always. She gathered what she could. Branches from outside. Dry grass caught along the cave edges, anything that could lift her from the stone. Because ground always takes heat first. Even here. Even in a place like this. She built slowly. Deliberately. Not rushing. Because rushing creates mistakes. And mistakes, in winter, are permanent. By the time she finished, it wasn't much. A raised bed. Basic, uncomfortable. But enough. She sat beside it, looked back toward the spring. Steam still rising. Unchanged. Unaffected. Reliable. That was the word. Reliable. Something she hadn't had since her father died. Since the house was taken. Since the cold began closing in. Now, for the first time, she had something that held, not by effort, not by constant work. But by design, natural, unavoidable. Real. Mara lay down slowly, pulled what little she had around her. And closed her eyes. Outside, winter continued, unchanged, unforgiving. But inside that cave, it had already lost its reach. The first days were not about comfort. They were about understanding. Because a place like this can save you, or kill you, if you use it wrong. Mara woke before the light reached the entrance. Not from cold, from silence. The kind of silence that only exists when nothing is fighting the air. No wind. No shifting wood. No fire needing to be fed. Just stillness. She sat up slowly. Waited. Measured what she felt. The warmth was still there. Not stronger. Not weaker. The same. That was the first rule. This place did not change. Which meant she could. She moved through the cave again, not searching this time. Studying. The spring stayed constant. Steam rising. Unchanged. The air closest to it, too heavy. Too wet. Heat that clung, but didn't last on skin. Not a place to live. Farther back, the warmth softened, balanced. Dry enough. Stable. That was where she stayed. And deeper still, the temperature dropped. Not freezing. But cold enough to slow decay. Cold enough to preserve. That was when she understood the full system. Not just shelter. Storage. Water. Heat. All of it already there, she just had to use it correctly. That was what her father had meant. Not just survive, adapt. She began with water. The spring provided it. Clean. Constant. No need to melt snow. No need to burn fuel. That alone would have been enough. But there was more. She tested the edges. Moved along the rock, searching. And found them. Small pools. Shallow. Connected to the main source. In one of them, movement. Slow. Faint. She crouched. Waited. Then saw it clearly. Fish. Pale, almost translucent. Moving without urgency. Creatures that had never seen sunlight, but alive. That changed everything. Food, that did not require hunting. Did not require travel. Did not require risk. She caught one. Clumsy at first. Hands slow from exhaustion. But enough. Enough to learn. Enough to repeat. The next problem, storage. Because food found must last. Or it doesn't matter. She moved deeper into the cave. Testing the air again. Feeling the shift. Until she found it. A ledge. Cold. Dry. Stable. Not freezing, but close. Perfect. She cleared it. Wrapped what little she had. Set it there. Watched. Waited. It held. That was the second rule. The cave had layers. And each layer had a purpose. Heat below. Balance in the middle. Cold above. A system, without construction. Without effort. Without failure. If used correctly. Mara began to build within it. Not walls.
Structures. Adjustments. She gathered branches from outside, when the wind allowed it, moved quickly, never staying long. Because exposure was still the greatest risk. Inside, she shaped what she brought, raised her bed higher, added insulation, created distance from stone. Because even here, contact takes heat. She lined the edges with moss, packed it tight, stopped airflow where she could. Because still air is what holds warmth. That was something her father had taught her, something she finally understood fully. The days passed without measure, because time outside did not matter inside. Only cycles: eat, store, adjust, observe, repeat. Her body began to change. Color returned to her skin. Strength returned to her hands. Movement became easier, clearer. Because survival is not just staying alive, it's stabilizing. That was what the cave gave her. Not comfort, control. And control is what winter takes first. Now she had it back. She sat beside the spring one evening, watching the steam rise, listening to the slow echo of water against stone. And for the first time, since the door had closed behind her, she wasn't reacting. She was deciding. Because this place was not temporary. It could hold. It could sustain. It could last. That realization changed everything. Because survival alone is not enough. You have to think beyond it. And for the first time, Mara began to imagine a future. Winter did not peak all at once. It tightened, day by day, until the valley stopped moving. Snow buried the paths first, then the fences, then the lower windows of every cabin. By mid-December, Black Hollow was no longer a town. It was a collection of places, trying not to fail. The animals went first, not all at once, quietly. One morning, they simply didn't stand. Another, they didn't wake, because hay runs out, water freezes, and cold does not wait. Inside the cabins, fires burned harder, longer, desperately. Wood that should have lasted months disappeared in weeks, then days. Men stopped sleeping through the night. They woke to feed the stove, again and again, because if the fire died, everything died with it. Elias Whitlock burned through half his supply before Christmas. Not carefully, not slowly, aggressively, as if force could replace design. It couldn't. The heat rose, escaped, vanished into the same places it always had. And the house began to lose. The walls froze from the inside. Frost formed along the seams. Water buckets stiffened overnight. The floor hardened beneath his boots. Everything he had taken was failing, but there was no one left to blame. That was the part winter always reveals. Excuses disappear first, then options, then strength. By January, the settlement changed. People moved less, spoke less, because energy was no longer guaranteed, and spending it had to matter. Caleb Turner noticed it first, not as a system, as a feeling. The town was quieter, slower, wrong. His mother had stopped cooking full meals, not because she didn't want to, because there wasn't enough. His father burned wood through the night, still woke cold, and one morning, he saw something he didn't understand. A place in the mountains, where the snow had melted, not completely, just enough. Enough to expose rock, enough to show water moving. In winter, that didn't make sense. He didn't tell anyone, because in places like that, things that don't make sense are either ignored or followed. He followed, climbing slowly, carefully, because the cold still mattered, still punished mistakes. He reached the waterfall, half frozen, water still moving beneath the ice, and behind it, something else, a shadow, an opening. He pushed through, and everything changed. The wind disappeared, the cold stopped moving, and the air was warm, not hot, not sharp, just enough to stay. He stepped forward slowly, then stopped, because someone was already there. Mara, alive, standing beside the spring. Harmed, real. For a moment, he didn't speak, because what he was seeing should not have been possible. "You're alive," he said finally. Mara nodded. "You shouldn't be." She didn't respond, because she already understood. The town had not found this place. The town had not learned. And now, they were running out of time. Caleb looked around, at the water, at the warmth, at the cave that held everything. Without effort, "My family," he started. Mara looked at him, then toward the entrance, toward the storm outside, toward the place she had been forced out of, and the man who had put her there. This was the moment. Not survival, choice, because what she had here could hold, but not for everyone, not without risk, not without limits. She closed her eyes briefly, not hesitating, deciding. "Bring them," she said. Caleb didn't move, because that answer was not what he expected. "Anyone who won't last the night," she added. "Only them." Because survival is not about saving everyone. It's about saving what you can, before it's too late. That night, the first group came. Slow, weak, barely moving through the snow. Mara helped them inside, one by one, positioned them along the warmer stone, wrapped what she could, kept them away from the damp air near the spring. Because even here, mistakes still mattered. The cave adjusted, not by changing, by holding. Heat stayed, air remained still. The system continued, because it had never depended on numbers, only balance. Outside, the cold deepened, unchanged, unforgiving. But inside, something else began. Not comfort, not safety, stability. And stability is what keeps people alive long enough to recover. Word spread, not as rumor, as proof. A place in the mountains, where the cold couldn't reach, where people didn't freeze, where something was still working. And slowly, one by one, the town began moving toward it. The storm did not end when people needed it to. It never does. Winter leaves when it decides to. Not when survival becomes difficult. Not when people begin to fail. Only when it is finished taking. But by the time the valley began to thaw, Black Hollow had already changed. Not in structure, in understanding. Because what had happened in that cave could not be forgotten. People returned slowly, carefully. Cabins reopened. Fires lit again. Smoke rose back into the sky, as if nothing had ever been wrong. But everything had. Because now, they knew the limit. They had seen what happened. When fire alone wasn't enough. When effort didn't matter. When design failed. Elias Whitlock survived. Not because of his decisions. Because of hers. He sat outside the cave entrance one morning, long after the others had returned, watching the water fall, listening to something he hadn't noticed before. Silence. Not the empty kind. The stable kind. He didn't go inside. Not yet. Because some places, you don't enter the same way twice. Mara stepped out beside him. Not speaking. Not needing to. He looked at her finally. I would have died. She didn't answer. Because they both knew that. I took everything, he said. Still looking forward. And you still let me live. Mara watched the valley below. Snow beginning to break. Water beginning to move again. I didn't save you, she said quietly. I used what was there. That was the difference. Not kindness. Not forgiveness. Understanding. Because the cave had not chosen anyone. It had simply held. And she had decided how to use it. That spring, things began again. Not the same. Never the same. People built differently. Not larger. Not stronger. Smarter. They looked at the land more closely. At rock. At water. At the way heat moved. And where it didn't. Some search for similar places. Hidden spaces. Natural shelter. Most didn't find them. Because places like that are rare. But the idea remained. The principle. You don't survive winter by fighting it. You survive by finding where it ends. Years later, people still spoke about it. Not as a miracle. Not as luck. As something simpler. A place that worked. And a girl who understood why. Mara Whitlock never claimed anything. When people asked how she survived, she gave the same answer every time. I didn't build anything. I just found where the cold couldn't follow. Because winter has always been the same. It freezes what's exposed. It takes what isn't protected. It weakens what isn't designed to last. The difference is knowing where its reach stops. People search for safety, above ground, in walls, in fire, in effort. Others learn something quieter, something deeper, that the answer was never in what you build. It's in what you understand. Mara knew that, and because she did, when winter came for everything, it left one place untouched.